Hello, friends in Japan, from the Japan Association for English Corpus Studies. So my name is Tom. I'm from Montreal in Canada, but right now I'm in Sweden as a sort of visiting researcher or dog's body, doing lots of classes and teaching and giving presentations almost every day. Okay, so I've got a talk ready for you, which I will put up. I hope it's sort of right. I meant to do this talk live so that I wouldn't be able to go back and play with it. So I will not go back and play with it. So what you see is what it's going to be. So you are the JAECS. I am Tom, and the workshop that I'm giving is called Data-Driven Course Design. It's not about data-driven learning, it's about data-driven course design. And I hope I got the times right and everything. Anyway, this is not live, so it doesn't matter too much. And my contact, James, will sort out everything that goes wrong. Anyway, here is a PowerPoint. That's the blurb that was sent out to you. So to summarize it, the premise and the research question of this talk, the premise, much learning research has been done, some of it by me, by lots of other people, and replicated. There's a ton of good research out there, particularly in vocabulary, which is my main interest, and use of corpus in vocabulary and other things. There are many good corpus tools based on it that are available. I'm just going to set my timer going. And are free to download, or are, in fact, like my website, LexTutor, are online. And nevertheless, how often or how systematically are these tools and this research brought together for the benefit of learners, for example, as courses or as curricula? You read a lot of one-off studies that were clearly not part of a course. So I think it's time to make some of this into a course. Might be a bit messy to do so. So what would doing so look like? I'm going to give you some concrete ideas, and some of this is already going into action in various places. I've been hired to do this work that I suggest in this presentation in 2 or 3 places, and I'm hoping to get some empirical data about its effectiveness, but I don't actually have any as a whole yet, although everything in pieces has been verified. So definitions, I don't need to give you this definition. What is a corpus? Representative collection, yeah. So in the 60s, we had million-word corpora. So many texts on so many topics of so many words, roughly uniform. And then later it became bigger, and now it's massive. 1010 corpus is sort of more language than a person would ever read or hear in a lifetime, things like that. I am more interested in small corpus, particularly in corpora that you make yourself, because a lot of the same principles apply. A lot of what we get out of a massive corpus, we also get out of a small corpus. I'll talk more about that, or it'll be between the lines as we go. So how do we read and interpret corpus? Well, if you wanted to know the relationship between men and women in France, you might run a corpus of femme, woman, and homme, men. And you can pretty much see that homme comes first, just visually. So it's easy to interpret that, but you can go deeper. You can look at collocation. For example, the words to the right of the keyword femme are in alphabetical order, which means they are grouped. So femme de, and so on. So there's a lot you can do with a corpus, but I don't need to tell you this because you are in the corpus studies business. Okay, Data-driven learning or corpus-based learning. I hope you can hear me and see me okay, but data-driven learning, I've just written a big meta-analysis with a friend in France about this. And this was the first table we put in our paper in language learning about 2017. Seems like just, but it's a while ago now. So the question is, what is the source of language acquisition? And of course, you know that in Chomsky days, it was intuition, language acquisition device, whereas now it's more input, usage, the language we see around us. But this can be broken further into categories of natural input or input as data. Input as data means treated by a computer program in some way to extract patterns, which the human mind can do also, but maybe computers can do some of that quickly and efficiently and on demand. And then a further distinction is input as data, whether inspected by a learner or inspected by an expert. So corpus-based dictionaries are input as data, but they are inspected by an expert and dished up to a learner as complete knowledge, more or less. Whereas data-driven learning is when learners grapple with the data themselves. And there are benefits to this as well as costs. So that is the place of data-driven learner in the broader scheme of SLA or second language acquisition. Okay, that's the main idea of data-driven learning. Language learning happens through input. Okay, but problem. Input reveals its patterns slowly, too slowly to be effective in most language learning, second language learning. First language, you've got all the time in the world. Second language usually is under a time constraint. But input can be treated by software to expose its patterns faster and more clearly. With highlighting, programmers can pull it out. And this is happening, as you know, in every science from genetics to rocket ships, but less in language learning, which is why we are interested in corpora. So the goal is to create more transparent, learnable input through data agglomeration and sorting and so on, as compared to giving people rules or explanations as to how language works. So that's the idea. You know this. It's well established as a set of learning tools. Frequency lists, concordances, learner as linguist idea, the idea of discovery learning, which is old but has had a major sort of boost from data-driven learning. The whole idea of exemplar-based and pattern extraction and so on, it's all very strong. Nick Ellis, Tomasino, I think his name is, but does it work at the language classroom level and not just in one-off studies? So still one-off studies, but Bolton and I did a meta-analysis and found a strong effect size for data-driven learning, learning procedures, methods compared to traditional. And of course, that's a loose bag, but anyway, it's a big effect size difference. 1.5 standard deviation, higher averages. So many ESL courses now employ these tools piecemeal, but can they be integrated? And at the point of course conception. So that's what people are interested in. This is the paper that Bolton and I wrote. It's actually a sort of major hitter. It got Google hits galore. And the studies looked at vocab, multi-word units, syntax, grammar, culture. Some of this is in French because the example I'm going to use in this talk is French. Because I'm doing a project in Sweden on French right now, so I want to get you the latest things and also it's sort of good for English specialists to think about learning from the point of view of another language. Because we are so used to English and we know what English is, and we make assumptions about English, take things for granted that, of course, our learners do not. Okay, so what is an example of a DDL, data-driven learning activity? Well, for example, on the right, you have pre-constructed knowledge, as I was talking about earlier. And on the left, you have a text which has generated a corpus for any word that it clicks on. This can be found in my website. And yeah, so there's prestigieuse. It's an easy word for us because it's a cognate, but it might not be for a Swedish person, for example. So this versus that, data versus pre-constructed knowledge from data, because the dictionary I'm using here is a corpus-based dictionary. So what is an example? Another example of learning based on a corpus, how about cultural sensitization? And I showed you this already, this idea of man and woman. Okay, you can read a lot on sociology or sociolinguistics about how man and woman function in these different languages. But if you look at three corpora, so there's homme et femme, there's man and woman, and in Spanish, I have it, I guess I didn't put it here, you will see that in all European languages, it's always man and woman. So then the question is, what does that tell you? And so if you dig into this, you can get some good answers. So a one-page report, is the sequence always man first? In which languages there's the most variation in the sequence? Is the common sequence formulaic? Or does it indicate a belief in the superiority of one gender, or one gender acting, the other acted upon, things like that? So that would be an activity that you could do based on a corpus, not just language, but in the broader context of the culture that the language comes from. There's lots of ways to use corpora, and you know this already. So why should data-driven learning as a learning method be effective? Well, obviously, it's going to take more effort to dig out the meaning of prestigieuse than to just have it given to you in a one-word synonym. It trains you in strategies, which you need anyway. The strategy is to build up evidence from the environment and to gradually put it together. It is incidental learning. You pick up collocations, for example, while assembling word meanings without even wanting to particularly. Data-driven learning appeals to adult learners. For example, if you give courses to people doing PhD who need their English topped up, data-driven learning appeals to them more than reading children's stories, for example, which is their actual level of English. It can be a basis for computer-assisted language learning. Right now, the basis for this is basically read something and then do multiple choice questions. But data-driven learning can give a basis to CAL. It is part of the theoretical apparatus of constructivism. It encourages autonomy, but also group learning, not only autonomy. But more than anything, it shapes up what students do anyway. They use Google for language research, but Google is not a particularly good interface for reaching the corpus of the universe of language. Maybe you can ask me questions about that later. Learning with corporate, however, is not the topic today, rather teaching with corpora, the design of courses conceived as corpora. Okay, so what does that mean? For this, we need some data-driven learning research, and we need some tools. I don't know if you can see all my PowerPoint screen there because my face is in the way. So for example, we need frequency lists based on standard corpus as well as course corpora. We need frequency list-based tests, frequency-based text profiler, and we need some empirical findings to guide our tool development. For example, a finding repeatedly found by Laufer is that reading comprehension depends on knowing 95% of the words in what you are reading, which almost is never the case. 98 has also been proposed, but since most people have about 60% in what they're reading, let's work with 95 rather than get tied up in the 95, 98 problem. Okay, so my website uses this standard French corpus. It was used in a dictionary by two linguists, Lonsdale and Labroix. I also have lots of English corpora, in fact, way more on my website, but it's fun to do French. So once you have a frequency list, this can be lemmatized and sorted by frequency, not by individual words. So that, for example, in the verb, in the lemma aller, you have je vais, tu vas, il est allé, etc. And so those get added up for the frequency. So the frequency list that we will be using is by lemmas, sorted by lemmas, not by individual words. On the left, it's individual words, as you see, because la and la are part of the same lemma, but here they are given separate status. So there's a lemmatization process. And that's what the frequency is based on. Okay, so once you've lemmatized all that, you get these head words for the lemmas divided into thousands, like what I call 1K, 2K, 3K. So first thousand, second thousand, and so on. And you can see that on the left side with école and âge, those are pretty simple words, whereas on the right side, équivalent and érigé are sort of more hard words. And so this goes on my website all the way up to 25,000 French lemmas. And of course, behind these head words, there is the complete form of each of these words, including probably up to 40 or 50 different forms in the case of French, fewer in the case of English. So once we have that, we can get basically a number for every word. Every word has a serial number. Well, an individual one, but also a lemma one, so that, for example, partir is K1, as you see at the bottom of this. This is an app, by the way. VP is vocab profile. VP1 means VP one word. And the whole idea of this is that a teacher in a classroom has an app, and they can get either English or French frequencies for individual words, just as simple as that. Frequency reflects the order of words that they're found in the environment. So partir is found a lot. Somnolence at K17 is found rarely. So it's obviously more important to learn partir than it is to learn somnolence. This argument, of course, depends on which corpus you use. If we use a corpus of academic sleep studies, we might find that somnolence is a high frequency word, but in a general corpus, or particularly a learner corpus, or a corpus, say, of children's literature, children's stories, partir is more frequent than somnolence. And so this is a good argument for learning words in the order that they are found in the environment, i.e. by frequency, although it's not a perfect system. So K1, K17. I forgot I had my little animations down there. Okay, so with corpus and numbered word lists, what can we do with it? We can find ways to provide learners with systematic vocabulary development, starting with systematic tests of vocabulary level in any language. So I've had these tests in English for a long time, and they're based on tests by other people. Paul Nation is one, who comes to Japan often, by the way, so maybe some of you know him. His VST, vocabulary size test. However, let's look at a different format of tests, which is the Palmyra type test, yes, no. If you have frequency lists, a frequency list, and here's the thing on my website that can generate random sets of 1K items, 2K items. These are 2K items. So vide, fabriquer, petrol, revoir. You probably know these words. Most of them are cognates, although some of them are false cognates like ignorer. You probably don't know entretien or exactly what coq means. Anyhow, with these, you can make a nice test. I've got a program that makes a nice test out of these. Mira's way of writing a yes/no test is to mix in false words, or what's called plausible non-words, in with the real words. So there's our words vide, fabriqué, and so on below, and out come these words to mix in, poulard, scombe, which are not words. And you make that into your test, and you ask learners simply to circle the words they know. And if they circle words that are not words, although they look like French words, they lose 2 points, and they gain 1 point for every word they say they know, which is a real word. So this is a very good way to get people's vocabulary size quickly. So there's the whole list put together with false words and non-words alphabetized so that they're mixed. And so do that for 2K, do that for 3K, do that for 4K, do that for 5K, and you have a very nice test that can be done in about 10 minutes. So it's not one of these tests where you have to photocopy all one day and then give the test all next day and run into fatigue effects by the end of the 14th level, which is what the VST has. I like this test a lot. So I have it on my website. You can look at it under the mobile section. So those are broken down by hundreds at the K level. So K1 has C1 to 10, and that's what it looks like. The learner just touches the box for the words that he or she knows. And for example, agenda, agrandir, avantageux, blâmer, those are all good words. Circuler is not. And then they get a score at the bottom. And from the score, they are sent to, there's lots of these different levels. And the score will send them, will basically give them the level at that, and send them to either flashcards or do the test again with a new randomization, new items. So it's kind of neat. For something more standard in the way of testing based on, once again, based on frequency lists. I'm dwelling on this a bit because I know that some of you are interested in testing. So this is a test that was, you can't see it at the bottom actually. So let's cut off my thing. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, so it's a test in French based, it's called the test de la taille du vocabulaire, or vocabulary size test. And it was done by my partner, Marlisa Horst, and a student of hers in 2016. So it's another test based on levels. And it's also on my website. You can get it there and do it online. So it's by the deuxième, troisième, cinquième, and I forget how many levels of French there are in it. So with these tests, we can find out, over here is an example of the score. So people do the test and they click the button and they get a score. And these are recorded on my website so that I can sort of see how people are doing. And interested in how people are doing with English, you can just write me and I'll tell you how to look at that. So typical findings from this test, and I have like thousands and thousands on, like I was saying, intermediate learners know roughly 1,000 lemmas, up to 1,500, not much more. By high school graduation, these are people who are studying NL2. They tend to know maybe 2,000, but up to 3,000, not much more. So, question, is this good or is this bad? Is it sufficient for what, or insufficient for what? Do they want to read the newspaper? Do they want to go on holiday? And so on. So to answer this, we need a similar test for texts, whether texts that are transcribed speech texts or texts of written text. Should be on the same metric as the tests for learners, and we call this a text profile. And so it asks how many words at each K level does this text contain. So it's the same question that a test poses. How many words does the learner know? Because obviously a text doesn't know any words, but how many words at this level does it contain? And then once we know that, we know the learner's level, we know the text level, we can make a match. Okay. So here, for example, is a text in French called Abondance scolaire. It's from Montreal newspaper story. So it's a normal text like you would read in the paper. This is the profile of this text. So, okay. So that means that 85% of the words are in K1, 92% of the words are in K2, and so on. So 95% of the words are in K3. In other words, this roughly means that a student who knows 3,000 words has 95% of the words in this text and probably can read it and make inferences about the rest, because that's what 95% means. Okay, so on my vocab profile software, and maybe some of you have seen it, it comes out with a profile like that and then uses the same color coding on the text itself, which gives a visual for a teacher who wants to quickly see if this is a text for his or her students. So blue is basic words, 1K, and the others. So you can see that there are a fair few in this text that are other colors, not blue. Compare that to a simpler text. This is a text that I use on my website for a different purpose. It's for a text-to-speech based dictation. So you can go find that on lextutor.ca if you like. So it's a simple text made for beginners, more or less, not quite beginners. So yesterday, Daisy got up early. She was traveling to work on a thing in another town. She got to her office at 8 o'clock with carrying in her hand a paper bag with buns. She was dying. She was hungry for a cup of coffee. She felt like a cup. So it's pretty simple. But look at this text. K1 is 87% of this text. Whereas if I go back, K1 was 85%. Now that may not sound like a lot, but this is only a little wee text and it makes a big difference. If you look down below, there's a lot more blue in this text than there was in the other. Okay, these are somewhat different. Daisy le matin and l'abondance scolaire, particularly after you leave the 3K. Look at the 4, 5, 6, 12, and so on. Okay, there's only 2 or 3 words in each one, or maybe even only one, but there's a lot of vocabulary in that text. So the person who gets 95% by virtue of knowing K3 has got quite a bit of work to do to make inferences for the rest. The point is, without these instruments, would we have noticed how much difference? Okay. To read Daisy with 95% word knowledge, you would only need to know 2,000 words. To read Abondance Scolaire with 95% word knowledge, you would need 3,000. So 1,000 words is quite a big difference, given that most people don't get that from their high school experience. Okay, so these tests and measures should let us compare profiles of learners to profiles of texts. The research has shown that students need 95, and texts tend to be more than 95% that are not known to the learner. The learners know about 60% of the text. Knowing fewer than 85% is an unuseful experience, and yet in all of my teaching in ESL, that was what we were doing. We were giving the students texts where they knew less than 85% of the vocabulary, and they were using their pencils to write in little words between the lines, which were, of course, not big enough. I was thinking of Arab countries now. Probably in Japan, it's the same. So this is a guide to what we can expect from our learners once we know the test scores and the text scores. So with these tools, we can begin to do curriculum design using tools. Let's start with the raw materials of a course. More and more reading courses are not in a book. They are a set of texts. In Canada now, almost all reading courses in my university are drawn from newspaper texts collected on the basis of interest. So that's a reading course. So 15 texts for 15 weeks, you read it. And this, of course, has the high advantage of motivation because it's stuff the students are interested in, especially if you ask them ahead of time what they are interested in, and then throw the course together more or less the night before. So step one is to get all the course materials together into a digital form as a corpus. So we need this in two formats, as separate chapters, in a zip file, and as one large single file. And with that, what can we do? We can find out whether our course is anywhere near our learners. Just vocab for the moment, but you could do this with other things. If not, what would bring it nearer? Put the learners up, teach the learners stuff, or bring the text down, simplify. And then another question that I want to briefly deal with, but it's a huge question. What, if anything, can be tested from this course? All right. This is a thing in Quebec. It was a set of English texts for Francophone adult ESL learners. Stuff that they would be interested in, like the police were wearing camouflage pants as part of a protest of some kind. And so that's why that first text is there, and all kinds of stuff. So this is assembled as a simple flat corpus. It's only 7,000 words. And it's also assembled as a zip file so that each of the corpora can be accessed separately. So now I want to talk about the project that I'm doing in Sweden, which is based on, I don't know if you can see this. The problem with teaching French to kids is that there is very little for kids in French. For some reason, the industry that's so well developed in English and highly utilized in Japan is like extensive simplified readers is almost not at all developed in French. And it's a mystery why that should be. Maybe you have ideas. Okay, so this is the corpus, all those texts. They're just little texts, 18 stories. They are of similar lengths so that you could use them one a week or whatever. And this is for 9-year-olds. These texts are for 9-year-olds. They add up to about 28,000 words. It's a whole book. It's a plausible reading course for 9-year-olds. And we know that 9-year-olds like this stuff. As you see from the picture, I don't know if you know this illustrator. His name is Senpei. He recently died. He was also an illustrator for the New Yorker magazine. Their cartoons, their famous cartoons. Okay, so that's a corpus. Yeah, there's the zip file version of it with the arrow. And there's the original flat, unzipped format of the whole thing as a single. So with this, we can run a vocab profile. And we can see that although it's for kids, the vocab is not exactly simple. So if you know 95% is reached only with 4,000 words. I don't know if you can see my cursor there, but when you get to K4, that's when you get to 95. Whereas knowing 2,000 gives you 91.5 and knowing 1,000 gives you 86.3. These kids almost definitely know 1K or less. They know part of 1K. So testing has revealed, I've done the testing in the meantime since I made this PowerPoint, that they indeed have a K1 score of less than 85%, whereas they need 95 in order to have coverage as needed for reading and for making inferences about the rest. And as you can see, there's plenty of rest there because K5, K6, K7 have got lots of words over the course of it. So these texts correspond to learners' interests, but will be challenging. So this is a prima facie test case for data-driven course design. How can data-driven learning make this text accessible? The simplest thing, let's start simple and work up. Data-driven learning can just give us the specific 2K to 3K words to teach, or the rest of the 1K. Whether to teach means pre-teach or emphasize when they are encountered in class, chosen on the basis of frequency, cognateness, etc., and so on. So this is the whole book, the vocab profile of K2. So you can see those are words that are in the book, and some of them are in there a lot. There's some that are in there once or twice, and some of them are words they know and we know already, but words like dessus, about halfway down the left side, is in there 13 times. That's a fairly difficult word. There are the K3 words. There are the K4 words. There's a lot of lexis there if you look at the book as a whole. So we've got motivation, but we've got more tough language than they can actually deal with. So what are the words they have to know? So for this, I'm going to a tool called range, and I'm going to put in the separate texts into range, which is going to give the frequency of each word or lemma and which texts it features in. So this is what the thing looks like. And over here you have Petit Nicolas 18 in the zip file. I'm asking for families, or in the case of French, that'll be lemmas. And the settings are to put in French and to knock out French 1K. Maybe I'll go back and reconsider that decision after I finish the testing, because the students are already weak at 1K, and just knock out maybe function words. So range for texts is going to give us this kind of data. So 3 columns, those are the words, the frequency, the range, and the vocab profile of each one. Papa and mama are level 2. Maître is level 1, which means teacher. And from this, we can extract frequency greater than 7, because there are, and range greater than 10, remembering there are 18 stories. And there is a basic frequency list of this story, set of stories. Or I could change those and get a larger list, or I'd probably get it down to a smaller list. So frequency of 7 throughout the series, and a range, in other words, in 10 of the stories, the word will appear. So those would be words that you would for sure need to teach, and I think they are mostly non-cognate or not obvious cognate. So, and particularly these are Swedish kids. So do they get words like drôlement, although we probably would, since it's kind of an English word. So once you know the keywords, Lex Tutor can make you flashcards. So approprié is one of the words, and press the button and you see the meaning of it. Word 8, meaning 8, and with an example, and you can do it as a quiz and so on. So these can be found to be quite effective. Gosh, I got to get going. I'm going too slow. I would have the students go through lists and check out the words that they don't know all of the words at a particular list, but maybe for adults, not for kids. More student-centered is to set up a group Lex database and have students choose their own words and share with others. And this is on a phone as well. So for example, I have set up this group Lex for French with Petit Nicolas as one of the things. So they enter words that they meet, or the teacher could tell them which words to put in. So for example, this can be done on a cell phone. They put in a word that they have found, they put in the example, and there's a dictionary there to look it up. And then they can see which chapter it's from. And at the end, they can do, yeah, that's the online version. People like doing this online for some reason. I would find it too small myself, but maybe in my 70s, I would be a bit hard of sight. And once they have done that, they can, on the computer only, they can get quizzes. It's a fantastic learning tool. And then the teacher can use this in class with a written test and so on. So group Lex would be a way of the teacher determining, or the students themselves determining, if they were, sort of that way inclined, which words, and dealing with them and sharing them with the class. So the several hundred words that you need for this can be done level by level by the group, either before or after they've read the story, and so on. But I'm more interested in a more principled approach. That would be, if you knew which words, just give them to them using data-driven learning tools. But I like the idea of them learning from text without learning tools, except behind the scenes. More principled is to use them to sequence the 18 stories from basic vocab to more complex vocab. In other words, to facilitate the conditions whereby learning from inference can take place. Okay, these texts, Petit Nicolas, are written for native speakers. They are not sequenced. Why would they be? Little French kids can understand them. To get a sequence, we return to Vocab Profile. We analyze the text individually, not as a group, as we did before. Then with Excel, we sort the percentages of basic 1K items. Now, 1K is obviously the most basic, so more 1K means more basic. This should give us a sequence from more basic to more advanced. It's what happens in English. And that's what happened before when I did the French project. So this is the thing on Vocab Profile. Somewhere on those pages, you can easily select this and save it to an Excel file. It's handwork. I could do it automatically if this became, big. Okay, how you doing? Holding up? So once I get all that information pasted from that part at the bottom into an Excel file, I can sort by column C, which is the K1 column. Those are all the stories in order over there, 1, 2, 3. And here's the K1 column. And notice that in all of these, the point at which 95% is reached is in gray shading. And the point at which 98% is reached is in orange shading. Okay, so in other words, with text number 1, they're not going to, they need 4, K4 in order to reach 95%, and so on. So when I sort by 1K, I was a bit surprised here. I didn't really get the effect I was hoping for. The difference between the easiest and the hardest text is 88 to 82, 88 at the top, 82 at the bottom. It's not that big a difference. I don't think it would be worth redoing the sequence of these stories, even if you were photocopying them. And why is that? And I think because in English, there are fewer function words, which obviously go into 1K. Nicolas brought a ball, one function word. Nicolas a apporté un ballon, 2 function words. So that's double in that case. So I think because of the structure of French, we have to do this a bit differently. So I'm going to sort by column I, then my column L, then my column O, and see what I get. Good. So now I have the texts together. So that's text 4, text 10, and text 9 that you reach 95% fairly quickly. And you reach almost 95% with K2. So those are the easiest stories we got. Then you move to the next level and move to the next level. And these are the hardest ones. Okay, so that's the first guess at the leveling possibilities of this story. So that would mean you'd have to take the book apart, photocopy it, put it back together again. Fortunately, it is out of copyright, so this would not be mammoth. Then you would have these stories in some kind of order, particularly if you were using half of them in one year and the other half in the next year. You would have, of course, I'm speculating this would need empirical evaluation. So we are doing a study, Group A, Group B, the usual stuff. Group A reads the stories in the sequence in which they were published. Group B reads the stories in the revised sequence. So are there differences in rate, comprehension, enjoyment, lexical development? Apply the various tests before and after reading. Grammar development, is there impact on writing, such as sentence length? And I have found this before, rather unexpectedly, that there is impact on sentence length from knowing more words. So that's a study that's underway. Okay, so time is sort of getting down. Yeah, we're okay. DDL has a lot to offer in course design, but there are more we can do, more things. So for example, corpus searches of the stories by the teacher to explore and teach different features, particularly if you have a good class, or even if you just want to know which word is recurring or which words are one-off. And then, as I said earlier, control of exam lexis. And then a topic that interests me is testing what teachers are doing in the classroom with the story. Are they recycling the vocab in the book? Okay, so here we can get a corpus. This is from Lex Tutor. The word chouette, it appears, but does it appear often? Yes. On the right, you can see that it's in story 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In other words, this cool word, it's sort of a kid word. It's not a formal word. It appears in all the stories. So if it comes up in unit 2, yes, put a bit of time onto it because it's going to be with us all the way. You can see this, if you like, on the French Concordancer on nexttutor.ca. Compare that to this word, apercevoir. It's in 3 stories, so it's not worth much time. You can go as deep as the students need you to. For example, you can use the Concordancer to get collocation. For example, répondre, répondu que, il a répondu que. Okay, so that's almost grammar. You can use lots of other ways to get collocation out of the corpus. You know about that. Or looking back at chouette, you can see the grammar of using this word. Chouette de plus verb infinitive. Chouette de jouer, chouette de savoir, chouette à manger. Okay, so what's the difference there between à manger and de jouer, de savoir? Okay, so you can get some really interesting syntax work out of this with data-driven learning tools. Plus 2 uses for this program on the website called TextLex Compare, which is TextLex's comparison. This is a program that determines the words or the lemmas that are shared between 2 texts versus that are unique. So on the left, in the 3 columns here, you see what is unique, you see what is shared, and you see what is unique to the new text. Well, I'm calling it new, could be second. Old, first, second, new. Maybe the terminology isn't good there. So what can we do with that? If you get a corpus of teacher talk for this course, you can use TextLex Compare to check how much of the lexis is getting recycled in the classroom. And if little is recycled, then you can include recycling practice in your teacher training programs. Low transfer from what is being read to what is being said is typical, I'm afraid. Interesting vein of research there. That's TextLex Compare, old text second text, new text. You just put them in and press the button, or you can upload and you get something like this, like I showed you before. So the typical finding is that like 40% of the tokens are getting recycled in the classroom talk. So if you put in the book as the first text and the classroom talk as the second text, or the teacher talk, not much. So this is 40%, especially if you strip out function words and 1K words, because it's not the 1K words that they especially need for reading Le Petit Nicolas. Exams. Okay, to write fair exams, we have to, of course, this is a bit of a problem when you have this several oddball texts, like 15 newspaper stories, or Petit Nicolas, which is not really made for this. How do you then write an exam? So you have to write questions that use the words that the learners may have seen before. And this is a case study here from Montreal, where 76% of the words on the exam were words that learners had seen before. Well, 76 is not enough. It has to be 95. Even if you assume that inference is a skill that they have been taught, they cannot make inferences if they have less than 95% of the words in the context known. So TextLex Compare was developed specifically for this purpose of testing your exam against your course corpus. And if you have a course corpus, as we do, then you can do this. Okay, so you what can you do? You can gloss the words that are in an exam. So we saw before the vocab profile with the whole corpus will tell you which words need to be glossed. So if you want to use undermine from the text, read this and answer questions, then you would have to gloss it. Or if part of the course was to make inferences, then you could say, well, that's one of the 2 to 5% that can be left for inference. That's another story. But TextLex Compare allows you to calculate in a principled way and then either gloss or be able to say, no, they should be able to get this from the context, just from counting up, giving every word a number. Teacher training. Yeah, we could teach teachers to use data-driven course design tools. I gave a talk fairly recently at Coventry, and for that talk, I tested UK and North American teacher training programs to see how much emphasis there was on any form of data-driven learning, and it was just about nothing. I think there were maybe 3 or 4 courses in the UK and none at all in the United States, except where Carol Chappelle works in Ames, Iowa, and they were at graduate level. Most teachers are not going to be graduate level, so this should be included, I think, if you think it's important. Teacher training should at least include needs analysis. This whole thing is basically the result of needs analysis. We're finding out what the students know, what's in the texts, how do they match. So teacher training rarely includes needs analysis because they're going to be told what to teach and they're going to be examined by the Department of Education and given a book. But if we're going to be giving courses that involve homemade materials, then they have to be given training in needs analysis. Even more, however, is awareness raising about word frequency. Learners, teachers rather, can go through a book like Petit Nicolas, assuming they know French, or in English, whatever book they are using, or newspaper texts, and they will not necessarily be aware of the difference between a 2K and a 4K word. But learners do. If learners only have 2,000 words at their disposal, which they partially know anyway, then everything at 3 and 4 is an unknown word, except if they luck out with a cognate, or if the context is particularly revealing. So I have a game on my website called Freak Train. It trains you in frequency intuition. It takes random words, like we saw before with yes/no tests, and it asks you simply to guess for each word. Is it a 1 to 2, 3 to 5, so on? For example, curriculum is a 3 to 5, and that's been. So you make all these choices as you go down through this list. And if you don't like that list, you can just get a different one randomly. At some point, you stop and you put in the answers and you press score or check. And then you find out if your intuitions are good. And using this test, this game, I've found that the real question isn't, does anybody get them right? Because nobody will get them right. Even me, I don't know if bagpipe is 6 to 10 or 11 to 15. I know it's not 1, but the question is, how many shots do you have to have? Like, you can repeat, you can try again and again, you can check, make changes, then check again. And then people who are highly frequency acute, they can find out the number of times that you have to do this. So it's basically a question of, are you moving a word up or down? So if you know that it's probably more frequent than you originally thought, or less, this is great. So teacher training with vocab tools. So I am proposing this is a way that, okay, so time is up. I am proposing that these and many other tools, which are already research-based and have been developed with research in mind, can be used to put together these homemade courses that are so popular now. So all of these routines are available on my website, so they're easy to find. You just go www.lextutor.ca, or even without the www, /test/vp/range/text/lex/compare/group_lex, and you can see all of this. And many of these ideas have been evaluated. So data-driven learning as a whole by me and Alex Bolton. Group Lex has had a strong evaluation. The 95% and 98% cutoffs are evaluated by Laufer at numerous times. Best one, I think, is 2010. And then if you're really interested in this idea, Corpus for Courses is a published version of an earlier presentation about this that I gave in Switzerland. So it's there, and you can get it at lextutor.ca/CV. It was called Corpus for Courses, so I was trying to get a play on horses for courses. But the abstract is in French there because it was delivered in Switzerland, but the rest of the paper is in English. So if you're interested in these ideas spelled out more slowly and perhaps with more articulation, you can go there and read it. James, my contact with you, asked about questions. I'm sorry this is not live. I was hoping it would be, but anyway, you can send me questions. The front page of Lex Tutor is has a link at the bottom. It says Tom@Cobb, And that link will take you straight to a little interface for sending me an email. That's the best way to send me an email. And if you put Japan or JELTS as the subject line, then that means I get to it right away. Okay, so I'm going to now stop sharing. Give you back the room where I am sitting in Sweden. It's a university housing. It's rather nice. And bid you, not adieu, bid you farewell, and hope to see you online or sometime in my life in Japan again. I really like Japan. I've enjoyed giving talks at JAECS, I think is the acronym. I've been teaching several times at Temple in both Tokyo and Osaka. And I hope to get back to Japan, maybe ideally when Paul Nation is there, and maybe meet some of you. So send me emails, argue with me, tell me what's just too crazy or too impractical, and so on. Okay, I am going to end this presentation and hope that you get it and that it's clear enough and all okay. Okay, Tom Cobb, lextutor.ca. Bye.